right?
All right, so I want to thank Carrie for introducing me. It's a privilege to be here. I also want to thank Sue Piner for giving my name to Carrie. Someone asked me in the back, like, we are a professor, like, which side are you on? Well, I'm wearing red. What does that tell you? But seriously, I have a bust of Washington and Reagan on my desk, so, can't get much better than that. So the prayer tonight, and then also what Susan just said about the school board, we're actually ties in a little bit to what we're going to talk about tonight at different points. I gave Carrie a few options of which I might want to listen about, and he chose Supreme Court. So what we're going to do is just go through how the Supreme Court originally started and where it is today. Okay? You've all heard of the Federalist Papers, right?
Yeah.
That thing that our Congress people should read. So in Federalist number 78, Alexander Hamilton wrote about the Supreme Court, and he called it what comes to be known as the least dangerous branch. Okay? This is what he says in Federalist number 78. Whoever attentively considers the different departments of power must perceive that in a government in which they are separated from each other, the judiciary, from the nature of its functions, will always be the least dangerous to the political rights of the Constitution, because it would be least in capacity to annoy or injure them. The judiciary has no influence over either the sword or the purse, nor direction either of the strength or of the wealth of society, and can take no active resolution whatsoever. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment. So what does that mean in layman's terms? It basically means that they can't enforce a law and they can't make a law. They can only apply the Constitution to acts of Congress or to the presidency or to states. Right? There's only a few things that the Supreme Court actually has original jurisdiction in. So like if Texas sues the United States, which we do a lot, if Louisiana sues Texas, that would go straight to the Supreme Court for them to hear. And then of course, the way we most often think about the Supreme Court is when we have appeals from the federal circuit courts. To give you an idea of how the founding generation and that came right after it felt about the Supreme Court, there's an alleged quote from Andrew Jackson, right? If you look at the slide there, there's a political cartoon written in the 1830s, or drawn in the 1830s, calls him King Andrew, because he was considered basically, the king. And Justice John Marshall ruled against his executive action. And allegedly, he said, well, Justice Marshall has made his decision, I'll let him enforce it. And Andrew Jackson went on and did what he wanted anyways. Okay? That is not how our Supreme Court is today. I'm going to make the argument that while we were supposed to be based on strict construction, today it is a living thing, considered a living document, and has turned in from the least dangerous branch to potentially the most dangerous branch. Okay? So let's talk about who better to know what the Constitution means than the founders, right? So I'm going to read you 3 quotes, and I'll talk about each when I'm finished. So bear with me because one of them is a little long. The first one's from Thomas Jefferson. He says, on every question of construction, carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. So the Roe v. Wade court might want to look at that. James Madison, often considered the father of the Constitution, says, can it be of less consequence that the meaning of a Constitution should be fixed and known than a meaning of a law should be so? Basically saying, if we don't know what the Constitution means, it basically isn't worth the paper it was written on. If it can change without amendment, you might as well just tear it up. Last is my favorite founding father. Only beat Sam Adams by a little bit because I like beer. Justice Kavanaugh, I have that in common. So, Washington says the basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists, till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment, which is what Article 5 says, in the way that the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation, for though in this one instance may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. So, here's an example of what we're talking about. Article 5 is all about the amendment process. The Constitution is not supposed to change without an amendment. There's only 27 amendments. The last one was written in 1990, or ratified in 1992. Okay? When he says this idea about, in this one case, judicial activism may be for good, but it's how we end up the downfall. The one case that brings that brings this to mind is Brown versus Board of Education, right? It's a school segregation issue. Barry Goldwater, the father of modern day conservatism, would tell you that while the act of desegregation was good, the federal government really had no authority on it for a very simple reason. Number one, the Constitution is clear. If a power is not explicitly granted to the federal government nor prohibited to it by the states, that power is reserved to the states and the people. Education and marriage and all things like that are not mentioned in the Constitution, therefore it should have been up to the states. Goldwater would have said a better way to do it would have been using market forces, which, we saw the Montgomery bus boycott worked really well, the sit-ins at Greensboro, North Carolina. So in this one case, yes, it was a good thing that was desegregated, but it's part of that pattern that the Supreme Court can just change our Constitution whenever they damn well feel like it. All right, so how did this happen? Because it wasn't always this way. Well, the answer lies in the Civil War. Because after the Civil War, there was a necessity to write certain amendments to protect the rights of the newly freed slaves, and also the roughly 500,000 free blacks that were living during the time of the Civil War. So they have the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection of the laws. Now, if you apply Jefferson's reasoning, we have to go back and look at the meaning of that 14th Amendment was to guarantee African Americans equality under the law. It was not meant for any other group, right? For a long time that stayed the case, but in 1897 we start to see what is called the nationalization of the Bill of Rights, sometimes called selective incorporation. So in 1897 the Supreme Court ruled that eminent domain applies to the states. Eminent domain is kind of tacked on at the end of the Fifth Amendment. Most people think, I plead the Fifth, that's what they remember for it. But at the very end, it's like government can't take your property without just compensation and just cause. Okay, so that's applied to the states. When I teach this to students, I say, in the Broncos, when they bought up all those houses on Walnut Street to expand Walnut, that's eminent domain. In 1925, free speech became applied to the states. Now, it is true that most state constitutions guarantee the right to free speech, but in this particular case, the Supreme Court has said free speech applies. Well, until 1961, that was it. Those were the only two parts of the Bill of Rights that applied to the states. Because remember, the first three words, or four words of the Bill of Rights are, Congress shall not, sorry, it says three words, Congress shall not, right? So it's applying to Congress, not to the states, all right? So in 1961, this begins to change. 1962, rather. There's two very, very important cases dealing with religion that come out of the 60s, which is a very progressive court. It's the Warren and Berger courts. In 1962, Engel versus Vitale banned public prayer in school. Abington School District versus Shemp, 1 year later, banned reading the Bible in school. Now, what would have our founders, the authors of the Constitution, thought about that? Well, let's talk to them. John Adams said the following in 1798 in an address to the military. We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Now, what he means by this is you have to put yourself back in the late 18th century. We're the only real democracy in existence, right? And the idea behind what Adams is saying is when you give people liberty, if you don't have morality and religion to hold back those evil desires of men, the sinful nature of men, then the Constitution won't work because it gives you too much freedom, right? It's like the whole idea of if men were angels, no government would be necessary, or if angels govern men, no limits would be necessary, right? The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Okay, this is back in the first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. But it was also reestablished by our first Constitutional Congress. This was a federal law that said religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Now, when I teach at the public school, there was this history book I used several years ago that claimed that the First Amendment, the idea of the wall of the separation of church and state is enshrined in the First Amendment. And I looked at that and I thought, geez, these history professors are lying to these kids. Because the phrase wall of separation of church and state was written in 1803 by President Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Association, basically saying the wall was going to protect religion from the government, not government from religion. Because Jefferson, Washington, Adams, Madison, all violated the current understanding of the separation of state. Just to give you a few examples, at the Capitol building, church was held on Sundays from several different religious organizations. The military Marine Corps band was loaned out to perform religious ceremonies. I mean, the first thing they did after swearing in Washington was go across and pray, right? So this idea that religion was not meant to be part of our public life is just flat out false, right? States, up until at least 1833, had a requirement that if you were going to serve as governor, you must be Christian, right? The Bible was used to teach morality and literature in public schools up until the late 1800s. I won't get into it now as it's not part of the topic, but the whole conflict between Catholics and Protestants was kind of the fire starter for religion to be taken away from churches. Education being taken away from churches. So there's really just no historical basis for that. But yet the Supreme Court has ruled, and the Supreme Court is followed by our Congress and our President. King Andrew would have said differently. Now there's another aspect that really changed the nature of our, go ahead to the next slide, really changed the nature of the government. And this is the New Deal. This is the end of dual federalism, okay? Dual versus cooperative federalism, as you can see in the slide. Think of dual federalism as a layer cake, meaning the federal government has their role, the states have their role, and they don't intermix. That's the way it was up until 1937. You see, here's a little known fact about FDR. He was a huge fan of this guy named Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. He lamented that the Constitution prevented him from doing the things they were doing to fix the economy. And the Supreme Court kept telling him, you don't have the power to do that. Your New Deal is unconstitutional, right? Well, what did he do about it? There's a book called about FDR called America's First Dictator. And so he threatened the Supreme Court by saying, I'm going to put 6 more people on the court packing scheme. The Constitution doesn't say how many justices we're supposed to have, just that the president nominates them, the Senate approves them. Well, the threat worked. The Supreme Court buckled, and in 1937 started to change the way the Commerce Clause and the Elastic Clause were applied to our country. And here's an example of how radical it was. Now, this is from 1942, before most of us in this room were even born. Okay? This is Wickard versus Filburn. Now, this is at the, Great Depression's pretty much over, but we're in World War II, and the government had decided that we needed to regulate wheat production and other types of production of crops. So what they told farmers was that based upon how many acres you own, you can only grow X amount of wheat. Well, Wickard is thinking about this, and he's like, okay, I want to grow the maximum amount allowable to sell to make money, but I'm going to grow a little bit extra wheat just so my family and I can eat. The Supreme Court said, no. You're not allowed to grow extra wheat on your own damn property because it may affect interstate commerce. Think about, that's 1942, and the Supreme Court is saying the government has the authority to tell you on your own property what crops you can and cannot grow. Vastly expanded government authority, and we continue throughout certain cases we'll talk about, but basically the reason why I say the Supreme Court is the most dangerous branch is because only 5 people is required to change what the Constitution means. That's it. 5 unelected, not ever removable upon good behavior, life terms, whatever. These 5 people can change what the Constitution says and means for 335 million of us. This is why I used to tell my students that Anthony Kennedy, I tell them, it's like, okay, who's the most powerful person in America? And they would say, the president. And I would say, not really. Foreign policy, yes. Domestic policy, it was Anthony Kennedy. Why? Because he was the 5th justice, and he was a swing vote. So while Roe v. Wade was done far before him, we'll get into why that applies here in a minute. But D.C. versus Heller and McDonald versus Chicago, those are our first to memorize. I've seen several people in here open carrying. Good for you. I have a license to carry myself, but my wife won't let me carry when I'm drinking, so I don't know why. It seems like a good idea. Obergefell versus Hodges, right? 2015, the same-sex marriage case, 5-4. Just like the gun rights case. Who was that 5th vote? Anthony Kennedy. Sometimes he sided with conservatives, sometimes he sided with the liberals. Well, Supreme Court nominations weren't that contentious until he left, right? Because Scalia dies, and they prevent Merrick Garland to be putting on the court, and they get Neil Gorsuch. No one, if you remember, no one really fought Neil Gorsuch that much. Why? Because they knew they still had Kennedy. Kennedy retires, now Trump gets to pick Brett Kavanaugh. Think back to what they did to that poor man. Why did they do it? Because the left will viciously defend the right to murder and dismember their children. Yeah. Sorry, I was supposed to be nonpartisan, but Obergefell versus Hodges redefines the definition of marriage. Now, what I saw a lot during this time was, it's no different than the miscegenation laws, right? That said whites and blacks can't marry. Well, NAACP had a little bit to say about that, saying what gay people have gone through in America is nothing compared to what black people have gone through. But let's go back to Loving versus Virginia. Okay, this is, I believe, 1967. This is the Supreme Court case that said, you cannot bar interracial marriage. When you look at their reasoning, it's because a marriage is fundamental to the survival of the human race. Now, what are they meaning? That marriage is fundamental to the survival of the human race because men and women can procreate. Therefore, because a black man, or excuse me, in this case, a white man and a black woman can procreate, you can't say that's not a marriage. Obergefell versus Hodges, now a marriage is who do you just want to have sex with? Completely guts, and what right did the Supreme Court have for that? Marriage isn't in the Constitution. The state should be deciding that, right? And besides, if this whole separation of church and state thing is legit, then why are you meddling in religious ceremonies, right? Well, so what this means is the law is not really fixed and known, okay? This is why they fought so much for Kavanaugh. They didn't fight so much for Justice Barrett for a couple reasons. One, they realized the backlash. 2, they probably didn't want to be seen attacking a woman like that. But the balance of the court had already shifted, so there really wasn't, a whole lot that they could gain from it. And that's a scary thing. Thank God that Trump got to nominate 3 justices, because for the next 2 to 4 years, those 5 or 6, depending on Roberts, is but he's kind of taken Anthony Kennedy's role as a swing voter. They're the only thing standing in the way of the end of America as we know it. So what can we do about this? Right? Well, I will get into the micro level, but the macro level, we've got to hold our senators accountable. Right? Every state has two. We've got to make sure that we are putting pressure on our senators to pressure the president, regardless of who it is, to put originalists on the court. the inspiration for this topic tonight was because I finished Ted Cruz's book a little while back called One Vote Away, and he talks about the need to, because Reagan messed up. He had a couple of supposedly conservative justices that ended up being kind of liberal. And so what we need is more Clarence Thomases, more Antonin Scalias. We'll see how the 3 Trump nominees play out as time goes on, but all indication looks like they'll be pretty good as far as that is concerned. And people are scared to death of Amy Coney Barrett because she is, it's no secret she's anti-abortion. So the left is really moving that direction to implement their will, which is sad because James Madison says in Federalist 10 that the tyranny of the majority is what we should be worried about, right? The whole idea, and I get to that because let's talk about the state of where we are as a nation here in a minute, but hold them accountable. Second thing we can do, and this is what Susan said, get involved in the school board, right? Write to SBEC, State Board of Education, right? Write to your local people, go to your city council, get involved at the local level, because one of the ways that we're going to win this thing is to get our youth realizing that America is exceptional. Kids, young people, 18 to 34, 54% of them have favorable views of socialism. The ideology that created fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and Maoist China killed over 100 million people in 20th century alone, and over half of our young people think it's a pretty good idea. I think that's what you spoke about, right? Yeah, it's ridiculous. Another scary thing. A couple of years ago, there was a survey done of 4,500 college students. Okay, and they asked them, when is it okay to use the heckler's veto to shut down free speech? Well, over half said it was acceptable. So basically what this means is, let's say I'm going to speak at a university and they find out, oh, he's conservative, so they're going to yell and scream and do all that kind of stuff while I'm trying to talk so that you people wouldn't be able to hear my message. Even scarier, 19%, almost 1 out of 5 college students thinks it's okay to use physical violence to shut up someone you disagree with. Cancel culture at its worst. And if the university doesn't do anything, they will go for the heads of the university. And I blame the heads of the university for being cowards. And it's not just them, it's the administration at high schools, the local school board, all of it. If you want to read a really great book that'll probably depress you, it's called The Coddling of the American Mind. And it's by 2 liberal professors, but like 1960s liberal professors, about how this idea that you're trying to shut up free speech and starts at the local level, like elementary and junior high. We're not teaching kids how to be critical thinkers, we're teaching them to just be in their little safe space. So what do we do from here? Well, politics is downhill from culture. This is something Candace Owens says a lot. Okay? Policy positions for kids 18 to 28, they don't care. They're all run by emotion. You need to instill values in our young people, values of liberty, individual rights, freedom, that you can become whatever you want to in America. Because guys, kids today, especially those that are not white, are taught they're victims and that they can't succeed as long as white supremacy exists. And Dr. Carol Swain, professor emeritus from Vanderbilt University, grew up in the old Jim Crow South, very dirt poor, dropped out of school in 8th grade, had 3 kids by 21, ends up becoming this very nationally renowned professor of political science and law. Then you got Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is one of the great thinkers in America. He gets called an Uncle Tom because he's conservative, but this is kind of what we're up against. So you've got to get them while they're young. Okay, get involved in the PTA. Go to school board meetings. Make your voice heard, because that's the only way we're going to reach out to our students. And I put up there on the last slide the 1776 flag. I'm a 2-time member of the Sons of the American Revolution. I have 2 5th great grandfathers that fought in the militia, one in Massachusetts and one in New York. I'm a member of the local chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, and I work with youth awards. And we don't ever, I have to basically force kids to do an essay on the Constitution or something. They get $500 if they win. And guess what? If only one person, they win $500. Then they go to state to win thousands. Okay? Our local chapter is a very valuable and unused resource. We have great speakers that can come to meetings to talk about the history, the revolution, the founding principles. They'll come in full Continental Army regalia, colonial attire, and they're great. They love going to schools, but they can't go unless someone invites them. Guess how many New Braunfels schools have invited them since, I've been here 16 years ago? You know where they've gone? Steele High School, because I invited them, and Round Rock, where one of the speakers has family ties. That's it. They're begging to go into schools and talk to young people, but it takes a teacher. So if you know a teacher, my wife, for example, invite them. I know this year is difficult because visitors aren't really allowed on campus because of this COVID nonsense, but that's something that we need to do. Because if we don't, the following is what's going to happen. This is by my favorite president, not named George Washington. This is from Ronald Reagan. He says, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same, or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States, where men were free." Thank you.